created by Daniel Clarke Bouchard.
First of all, I'd just like to say that it's really an honor for me to be able to talk with you guys. I think the work you guys are doing is so very monumental. So thank you for having me. And most of my questions are sort of for the group. So please feel free to chime in if you have a thought or an answer. So my first question, I would say, we'll start maybe more generally. Why did you decide to create a story about the Porters, and what drew you to this particular group of people in Canadian history?
We've been saying this every day. So, I mean, not every day, but while we're doing this junket, basically it was just the thirst of wanting to know more about Canadian Black history. And in that pursuit of learning so much about Canadian Black history, one of the common denominators that came up was Porters. And I didn't know much about Porters other than what was represented in the United States, those old black and white movies and stuff like that. But I didn't realize that the Porters from Canada and the United States formed together to form this huge union called the Order of Sleeping Car Porters in Canada and the Brother of Sleeping Car Porters in the United States, and they formed together to form this huge union. And what also inspired me as we went down this road to learning about these Porters and these communities was also with Bruce Ramsey, the other co-creator of the show, who's from Montreal. We ended up going to Saint Antoine, which is now Little Burgundy. And right there at the time when the Negro Community Center was still up, it was boarded up, but it was still up. And they were telling me about stories about Oscar Peterson and Oliver Jones and Oscar Peterson's sister. And they used this community center to teach them, music and skills and, woodworking. And it blew my mind because I couldn't believe that there was an organization like this or a building like this in Canada. I didn't know anything about it. So initially we thought, well, if we make this show, maybe there'd be a way that we could, garnish enough money and help to, restore the building. And 2 years after that thought, the building was knocked down. So we were really heartbroken, but it didn't stop us from wanting to proceed in trying to get this show put forward.
Okay. Very interesting. I know Oliver Jones personally, so that's quite interesting that you discovered him that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my next question, sort of as a follow-up to that, in your view, how did the Porters, in sort of their unique position, how did they impact their communities, and how do you think that they contributed to Canadian culture as a whole?
Do you want me to continue with this, guys, or someone wanna? Okay.
Go right ahead, bro.
I mean, collectively, these men across the country, not just in Saint Antoine, but across the country, these men and women, but these men became the backbone of these communities in the sense of bringing in the money. What little they did make, the sense of the tips that they brought back into the community. And then from there, while they were still working, the wives that took that money and went to buy groceries or clothes, or better yet, went to spend that money in locations where they knew there were other union people of different walks of life, and started learning about unionizing and coming together. And they actually were the backbone in the basements of these churches across the country that helped to build the foundation of this union. And what they meant to the community, I was saying earlier that mothers used to push their daughters towards Porters, because they had an income, because it was so hard at the time for a Black person to have any sort of a job. I remember reading in Stanley Grizzle's book, My Name Is Not George, where he used to say being a porter was the hardest job a Black man could get, but the only job a Black man could get, and I didn't want to starve. But in the sense of the community, with these people forming the union, it helped to actually establish Black middle class across North America. So in doing so, that allowed someone like us, people like us, to walk on those very shoulders to do what we're doing. It allows you to go to McGill University. It allowed them to have daughters and sons, or grandkids rather, who were the first ones to go to McGill University. So I just think in that aspect, these guys were the cornerstones of change throughout North America and the seedlings.
Interesting. So I would say my next question is about so the series, we know that the series sort of details the process of organizing and mobilizing in the early 20th century, especially for the Porters. And so how do you believe we've moved from community organizing? How do you believe it's gone from that point to now? Like, how do you feel the process of community organizing has evolved from that point in history to now?
It's interesting because I feel like then and now community organizing is how great change happens on a political, social scale. I mean, the biggest shifts in policy and politics are happening because community organizers, and often BIPOC community organizers, are mobilizing in churches and schools and community halls and doing the door-to-door work. And there are a lot of other entities that benefit from that, but really to give credit where credit is due, I think that is an ongoing process. I think oftentimes we see women of color leading those movements, and that remains. But I just think the machine has gotten, as technology has gotten, machine has gotten more streamlined. I think people have gotten, activism has not diminished, but it's just embraced technology and the roots of that. But there's still an old school knock on doors, go to the church bake sale, go to the whatever, that just really has been the core and the backbone of progress in our communities and in our world at large.
Right. I agree. So in researching for the show, were any of you able to sit down with community members or perhaps living Porters in Montreal or in Winnipeg? And if so, which of the encounters you've had perhaps stood out to you the most?
You're muted, Arnold.
For me, I got a chance to interview Mervyn Dash. He's no longer with us anymore. I got a chance to talk to some people that actually worked at Rockheads, which kind of loosely based towards our Stardust. I got a chance to talk to Shirley Giles, who was running the Colored Women's Group, and Marlene Jennings, the ex-MP. So I got a chance to talk to quite a few people. And then across the country, I got to talk to, oh, and also David Clarke. We got a chance to talk to David Clarke as well, who was a Porter in the 60s, I think, late 50s or early 60s. And then I got a chance to talk to a daughter of a Porter in Vancouver, and got a chance to get that perspective of he was never home because he was constantly working, and when he did come home, he was always sleeping, you know, because of the long hours that they worked, and really raised by their mother, and just having that, learning that aspect of it, as well as going to as many museums as I possibly could, and you know, Annmarie and I got a chance to go inside an old Porter car train right here in Toronto, and so yeah, the community helped us. Let's put it that way. And even while we were shooting, there was one, I'm gonna forget his name. There was one background performer whose father and uncle was actually Porter, and he grew up in Little Burgundy. So he at the church, the United Church that we were portraying in the show, he was baptized in that church. you know, the nightclub that we were talking about, he used to go to that nightclub and dance and stuff like that. So it was really cool to have that aspect of, we are portraying something of history, but he was living history. And that was really cool and very humbling experience.
I'll just add to that. Arnold also kind of set it up for us to talk to Shirley and Marlene, which was so lovely. But one thing that happened after the show was announced was someone reached out to me on Twitter, and it was a man, and him and his sister, they were the grandchildren of a Montreal porter who had been a part of the unionization movement. And so we got to have this call, and they had all of this like amazing information, like truly from the time. And it was just, you know, just such a gift for him to reach out to us and just like share the story of like their family and things that they've been holding on to all of these years, just looking for the right place to share it. And I think our hope is that not necessarily that our show is the right place, but that our show is starting the conversation for everybody to bring their stories. Like our show is kind of an amalgamation of stories from Montreal and from Winnipeg and from Toronto and from Ontario and across the border. And so we kind of had to house it all in this one little place. So we hope it really does bring even more stories to the forefront for people to share.
It would be so great if exactly what Marsha's talking about, because I kind of think of it as like, you know, things from the attic, you know what I mean? Because they had all this stuff in the attic. It'd be kind of great if, because, you know, it is St. Antoine, but there were so many of these Black communities throughout Canada. It'd be great if people really take on this show as their own, as if there was a way for them all to communicate and share the stories of their forefathers and foremothers and send pictures and talk about those experiences. I think it would be really a beautiful, you know, I've said this before, but a beautiful love letter to their descendants.
There's this thing and it's called the internet, and I think it can be possible. I think it can be possible. Yeah.
Thanks, RT.
Very interesting. And maybe on the subject of love, sort of, you know, often what I've noticed is that, you know, film and television, especially when it comes to Black history, often romanticizes a lot of these events and a lot of these moments that have happened in the past, and sort of turn these stories into sort of digestible stories that everybody can absorb instead of perhaps sort of honest depictions of what happened. So was it important for you as creators to sort of not fall into the trap of creating characters that were romanticized or overly glamorized, perhaps?
That's definitely that's a great question. And it's absolutely was something that we all, on all accounts, from our showrunners to Charles and I directing, to all of our actors, and even our producers, you know, at Sienna Films, you know, just wanting to make sure that while we're depicting these events, that we show all aspects of life for these people, because they're people. They're not just, you know, we're not just checking a box of historical happenings that are going on. These are people that brought about these transformations to the fabric of our actual society. So we wanted to, you know, very much show, while there's struggle and there's oppression and there's discrimination, but, you know, that there's also triumph and resilience and hustle and joy and laughter and fun. You know, it was important that we showed the fullness of life as you're trying to maneuver, as you're trying to chase your dreams. You're still falling in love. You're still dealing with relationships. You're still chasing an ambition that you have, that people want to close the door on you for. So that journey was really important for us to make sure that it was varied, that we aren't just representing one type of a character, but that these characters make different decisions, sometimes not so great decisions. They can mess up, they're human, and we really, it was from the ground up. It was part of the DNA of the project, and we hope that we've done a half decent job at that.
Amen.
Very interesting, because yeah, that's sort of something I, as a watcher of film and as an admirer of film, I always watch to see how these stories are portrayed. And if, were you ever struggling at any point in this production to sort of show the full humanity, the complexity, sort of the multi-dimensions of these characters? Did you ever come across a struggle of, how do I show this story in an honest way that allows people to be inspired?
I think
I
when you're
think it's a
developing,
constant struggle, but go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
right? I think when you're developing character, writers, we know that a one-dimensional character is neither near realistic nor interesting. And so even, I think the struggle is sometimes you're dealing with historical heroes, and we do, as you mentioned, like to romanticize a story. And I don't think showing a person's flaws or failings makes them less a hero, makes them less a leader, makes them less a historical powerhouse. So I think that was something that we always strived, I think, in the writing, and I know that our actors brought all different sides to these people. Like, I think when you take away the need for perfect humans, then you kind of put our characters and our historical heroes on a level where we can all access them, because we know we're looking at it through the lenses of flawed people ourselves. So when we see other people who are struggling, who make mistakes, who get up, who fall, who do things that are cringeworthy, who do things that are praiseworthy, I think that's interesting watching, and that's the life journey that we're all on.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And perhaps as a closer, I know I don't have much time. So perhaps to all of you, how should the story of the Canadian Porters be remembered in future generations? Because we know how it's being told now with your show, but how in 30, 40, 50 years, how do you think people should view it? And should they view it the same as how it's depicted in this show? Or should it have evolved by then? What would be your ideal sort of view of how people view this movement and the Porters?
I think for me, if you think about, look, we're not the only people who are telling the Porter story. It's being told in different mediums in the past. From that perspective, from what they're going through at that particular time, from that viewpoint. And now we are telling this story as best as we possibly can in a dramatic aspect from our platform, from our perspective and what we're going through. And I think as the years go on, we evolve just like anybody else. And I think the lens of that will also change. The common denominator, I think, is in the sense of that we will always be seeing ourselves, but what we're going through and what we relate to at the time will always be constantly in flux. So to 20, 30 years down the road, I think people will still be looking for the seedlings of who they are and who represented them within the place that they call home. But how they see that, through what lens, may be completely different.
I also think that there's just a lot of, as Arnold is saying, there's a lot of story to be told.
Oh, yeah.
This is one, one with multi strands, but there's an infinite, universe of Black history, and stories of ambition and that can be explored. So this is a version, and we hope that it inspires many, many more people to dive into that rich history and dig for their own version.
I'll just say that all of our characters, are in some ways, like all of our characters are fictional, like our main characters are fictional. Obviously we have some historical characters, but the rest are fictional. And they are kind of like a compilation of many stories we heard of different people. And so I hope in this time, people will be trying to find out who were the real porters who started the Order of Sleeping Car Porters, who was, you know, this person or that person, and to find those real people as we had to. And then I hope 30 years from now, they don't have to search for it as we had to now, that it has become a part, and maybe there's some other total different view to take on this story and to look at it.
Maybe 30 years from now, they'll be like, who were those group of Black folk that made that series? Yeah, that's it.
Arnold, we're never going to be forgotten. Daniel's going to make sure of it. Thank you.
I got
Thank
you.
you.